Hi, my name is Charlie Fairbairn and I'm on the Pro No Coders team for FlutterFlow. And today I'd like to introduce to you, by way of video tutorial, as to how to integrate FlutterFlow with VS Code. Now, there are several reasons why we'd want to do this. One, as I've been asked to do so, is that you might want to compile your web application to your own server rather than using the one that is built into FlutterFlow, maybe for security reasons or maybe because you think you will scale beyond their capabilities. But this tutorial is so similar to others that I've wanted to give that I'm going to include other aspects of it, which is that integrating VS Code and GitHub and other softwares is going to speed up your workflow enormously, and I'm going to show you how, and I'm going to show you why. And the other aspect of compiling your applications, whether they be the web applications or the mobile phone applications within VS Code, is you get a much better idea of the debugging. It will literally point you in the right direction as to what maybe you've done wrong, and at sometimes what even FlutterFlow themselves have done wrong. And we get the advantage of using the hot reload without having that 30-minute time limit, which, if you think about it, if you're doing a session and you reload on FlutterFlow, you may lose 50 minutes, 60 minutes in a day just on waiting for that to reload. Now, the software we're going to be covering here is obviously VS Code itself. What we're also going to talk about is GitHub and GitHub Desktop, which is basically how to get your code quickly and easily across to VS Code so that you can do the compiling. Now, technically speaking, it's VS Code or Android Studio, but I had a problem the other day that it may be necessary to install both to get it to work, but it should only be one or another, and we'll come to that in a minute. So without further ado, let's get on with it. And what I'm going to do initially is to run through what we've already got available to us within FlutterFlow. Now, if you want to skip forward just to this installation, go and slide across and have a look for another black and white card, because that will announce the beginning of the actual installation. But I did want to just remind everybody of what we've got within FlutterFlow already. Now, if we go up here, we've really got three different ways of compiling an application, but we must be aware of the fact that each of those are compiling web applications. And the run and the test are similar. The run is more permanent, but there is no ability to hot reload. So if you want to make a change over here, you literally have to wait 2 to 4 minutes again to see what effect it had. The test is much better, but as mentioned, it has a limitation of 30 minutes, which is really 25 by the time you've refreshed and got the page back up and running. And it's a bit of a time waster. And publish is a way of getting your web application up into the cloud without having to host your own website, which is really fantastic. And if you go down here, you can install your own domain as well, and it's all explained. Now, the other area we need to quickly look at is in the developer menu here, because there are 3 options out of these 4 that are extremely useful to us. The first one, let's have a look at the download APK. I know a lot of people who are using this in order to do testings of their applications is that every time they make a change, they download the APK. They may use something, as I used to, and sometimes still do, is upload that to Google Cloud, get Google Cloud on my Android phone, download it again, install that app, and see how well it runs. And there are still circumstances where I will still do that. The alternative to doing that is that you can actually download the code. You download the code, copy that to a local directory, and within VS Code, which we're going to come to, you then compile it from there. It is a good way of doing it, but it's still not the fastest way of doing it either. And the final way is to push to repository. And what this means is it's going to take that code and it's going to put it across into the cloud, into GitHub. And we're then going to use, if we recall, that other piece of software that's on that list, which is called GitHub Desktop. And this will download that into a directory onto your laptop. And from there, we're going to compile. And the beauty of this is that we are then going to attach a real phone to our laptop. And when we do the hot reload, it's going to hot reload directly onto the phone, saving an enormous amount of time. And a final advantage of doing it that way is that you can actually, the development machine that you're working on can actually be separate from the machine that maybe is running the VS Code, which frees up resources and makes everything quicker. One thing also that's important to mention is that the hot reload that we're talking about is hot reloading into an actual mobile phone. We're not talking about a web version of it. And you can see here on my warnings over here, share actions is not supported on the web. Therefore, there are quite a lot of things that you simply cannot use up here, the web version, in order to be able to test. And a good example of that would be push notifications, for instance, and quite a lot of things that I use here. You just can't do it that way. And of course, when we're pushing to a real phone connected to a laptop, we're not restricted by the 28 minutes either. So you get several advantages there. You're going to see your app on an actual mobile phone if that's what you want to do, and you're going to have limitless amount of time to make very, very quick changes and see what happens on the mobile phone. Very, very powerful, very, very useful. And it will be a little bit of a struggle to get through setting up VS Code, but it will be worth it. Let's get to it. Okay, so this is what we need to do for installation. We're going to go and get ourselves a GitHub account, which I've just done to refresh myself, and it's really not that difficult. We're then going to take certain links that are in the GitHub account, a URL in fact, that will link FlutterFlow to GitHub, so that that button within FlutterFlow that you press is going to send a copy of your entire code across to the cloud. We're then going to install GitHub Desktop, and the purpose of that is to download a copy onto your local drive, or indeed the drive of another machine that you may have beside you. We're going to link the GitHub Desktop to GitHub so that it downloads the right code. We're going to install VS Code, and then to answer the question that I've really been asked, we're just going to briefly talk about the web app aspect of that so that we can upload that using FTP to a web server that's then going to show that as a website on a proprietary server, circumventing those potential security issues and scalability issues. So let's get to it, shall we? Right, so I did just go through the processes of signing up for a new GitHub account, and you can see that ultimately if you go through the whole procedure, you're going to end up with basically two nearly identical links. You're going to have this link up here, which is the URL to your GitHub account, and you're going to have this one, which as far as I can tell is exactly the same, except it's got Git on the end. Now this is the one here at the top that we're going to use, and we're going to put that into FlutterFlow, and that's going to link FlutterFlow to your GitHub account. However, when we link that to GitHub Desktop, which we'll do in a moment, the slight variation is what they're looking for. They're nearly identical, pretty simple to understand. So if we just scoot across for a second to FlutterFlow and see how we're going to connect FlutterFlow to your GitHub account, we're going to go into the settings and integrations down here, and we are going to go down to the bottom where it says GitHub, and that is the URL without the Git on the end, you might notice, and that is where you're going to connect your account. There'll be various security questions. Well, I hope there are, because I wouldn't be displaying my GitHub account to you if there weren't, and you should go through the process there. There will be a setup process, but that's the URL that you want to put into FlutterFlow. That will then allow you to use the links that we've got over here under the developer menu, push to repository. That's going to take a copy of the entire code, the same code that you would get if you were to download code, and create a copy in the cloud. Now, one thing that's worth pointing out, this is a one-way process. There's nothing you can do that would corrupt the data in the other direction and send it back to the FlutterFlow server, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, this over here is what you will find GitHub Desktop to look like once you've downloaded and installed that onto your local machine. And remember, that is a program. And there will be a place to up here, the repository, in the repository settings, where you're going to put in that URL, this time with the Git. Okay, and that will connect this account to the cloud account. And this is going to create a local directory where you are going to hold that code. So it's a sort of two-stage process, very, very quick. When you press the button in FlutterFlow, it's going to go to the cloud. Press the button in GitHub, it's going to end up on your machine. So much quicker than any other way, I can utterly assure you. Follow the instructions for this and everything should be set up. Choose a directory on your hard drive that is suitable, documents on Windows, where you're going to hold the code. Now, at this point, I will assume that you have downloaded Visual Studio Code onto your computer as well. And this button here is extremely useful because you don't have to remember where you put it in anything like that. It's quite important that you open Visual VS Code in the right directory. It doesn't matter what you do. It has certain code that's in there, so it understands which language it is and stuff like that. So this button is extremely useful. And if you open that up, you're going to go straight into VS Code in the right language with the right configurations. So I always do that as the shortcut. Now, after you've pushed your code to GitHub and then use GitHub Desktop to download it to your directory, you're going to see something like this, but we'll cover this in a bit more detail. The place I want to bring your attention to is extensions. You need two extensions to start off with. You need to put in here Dart, and you need to go to this one, Dart Language Support Debugger for Visual Studios, and you need to install that. Now, obviously, I've done that, so I'm not going to do it again. And the other one that you want to do is Flutter, and it looks almost the same. And it will take a few minutes to do that. And this will set up the whole of the VS Code to understand the language that we're working in and to do all the debugging. Very powerful. Now, I think I've probably got a few others running here, but I think that's probably more advanced and we won't talk about that yet. One little tip, though, by the way, is when you first open up VS Studio, you may find that you don't see any of these things here, and they're really actually quite important, and it's really silly of them, but you might find that it's like this and you have to drag it up to see them. Just a silly thing, but sometimes these silly things stop you getting on and you don't understand why my screen looks different from yours. But there's a tip, just drag it up and it should be there. Now, it's slightly debatable whether VS Code, having been set up with the Flutter and the Dart extensions, will actually do this step for you. I don't think it will. To be on the safe side, go and Google the downloads for Flutter and go and choose the right version for your operating system. There will be a Windows version over here, and I believe there's a Mac version too. Now, all this is going to do, it's going to download you a zip file that you're going to unzip. It's not a program that you really install, and you want to put that into a local directory on your drive. And don't put it in program files or anything like that, because that requires elevated permissions. The best place to put it, I put it, is literally C://src, standing for source, /Flutter. And this actually is Flutter and Dart, so you don't need to worry about Dart. So you need to download and install that on your hard drive. This next step is a bit dull, really. One needs to add the path of the Flutter to the environmental variables. I'm sure a lot of people will know what that means, but I'll just do it very, very quickly over here. So we edit the system environmental variables, and what it's going to do, it's going to allow that Flutter SDK to be found irrespective of where we are in any particular program. And it's important for VS Code to be able to find it. And we go into the environmental variables, we put it in the path over here, and we edit that. I think we'll scoot down here. It's actually the correct way to put it in we're going to find it, is actually where we put it. There it is, that one there, source Flutter. In my case, it got to be Flutter bin, because when I unzipped it, it gave another Flutter directory. So that's exactly where the bin file is for me. And you want to put that in and you want to save it. Now, again, slightly debatable whether you need to reboot your computer for that to kick in or not. On the safe side, do it, because if you don't, you will wonder why things are not working. Now, if you have got everything working properly, and we go back to VS Code, you should be able to go into the terminal here. Now, for Windows users, to be clear what terminal is, it's exactly the same. I mean, exactly the same as if you were to go into a CMD command over here. It is the Windows PowerShell. And I mean, it's exactly the same insofar as if I put a command into the Windows PowerShell, it is available down here if I put an up arrow, it'll go through all the old commands that I've put in there. And one of the ones that I put in. Now, if it's working properly, Flutter -H means that it's going to just give you a list of commands that you can use in Flutter. And if that works properly, it means that you've got your paths, your environmental variables correct. And it's quite important that you get that right. So if it gives you this list of commands, then you've got all the steps right. And we are ready to get on with the next step. Now, with the setup that we've got so far, we've got the ability to be able to run our application as a web application, exactly the same as you could do it within FlutterFlow. And you see down here on the bottom right-hand corner here, we've got two devices connected. That is the Chrome version. I think if I click on that, we're going to see we have the option to change that to Edge. Okay, so we've got Chrome and Edge. And one can also install local emulators over here. But I have discovered that if you want to connect your mobile phone through a USB cable to this so that we get to the result that we want, then you have to install Android Studio as well. So we're just going to skip to that in a minute. But just to focus for 1 second, if I was to go onto here on the web, so we've got the Chrome version of it, the technique here is we go and run this, and we're going to come to a minute what the difference between start debugging and run without debugging. I'm going to run without debugging, and it's going to do exactly the same as it does on the FlutterFlow. I'm going to do that, pause it. It does take a couple of minutes to do. Here are a few expected things that you're going to see. Down in the bottom right, it's saying launching for this. That will happen in the web version, and it will also happen in the Android version too. It means it's compiling. And if you want to go in, the debug console will give you a greater idea of what it's doing. Now, for the person who asked the question, can I just copy the code across? This is now creating the web version, and it's going to launch it in Chrome so that we can actually see it. And one could launch it in Edge if we wanted to as well. And that will appear now within a directory over here that we're going to come to, and that will be the directory that you will want to upload to your web server. So that's going to take a couple of minutes, so we're going to let that simply happen. Now, after a few minutes, you're going to notice that a browser pops up automatically, and it's just loading, and it's doing the whole local host itself. And you're going to be able to see a version which is equivalent of how FlutterFlow fundamentally do it on their systems, except this is being done on our system. Now, I did mention that it's a good idea to do this on a separate machine if you can, because I tend to have loads of windows open, and this does like to have quite a lot of resources. So this will load up in a second, I'm quite sure. Okay, it's kicking into life, and when we see a lot of green going on down here, this is actually going to give us literally interactive feedback on what is happening within our app. So if I, for instance, touch that and put United States in there, and I put a telephone number in here, you're going to be able to see in the green debug console what's actually being sent to your application. Fantastic for debugging. We're not going to cover that right now, otherwise this tutorial will go on until the next millennium, but it is worth knowing that you can do that. Nonetheless, here the most important thing that we need to know is that if we were to send our data across from FlutterFlow using the GitHub process that we've been through now, then we would be able to do two things here. We can do a hot reload on this one, and that means it will not reboot the phone. It'll literally do it in the quickest possible fashion you can imagine. This one will reboot. When I say reboot the phone, no, reboot the app. It's a little bit slow, but if you want to make sure that it picks up maybe some page variables at the beginning, this one's about 5 seconds. This one's about 10 seconds. And if you press this one here, it'll stop the connection. But we're not using at the moment a connected mobile phone. So generally speaking, this is not what this tutorial is about, but it's useful to demonstrate, since we've got the screen here, what these buttons do. So in a minute, I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to talk about how we get that onto an actual real phone connected by a USB port to your computer. Okay, I'm pretty sure that you do need to head over to download a version of Android Studio. It's quite a big program, and one would think that wasn't necessary, but what this is going to provide is something called an ADB connection, which means it's the driver that allows your phone to connect via your USB port and be picked up by VS Code. I would have thought it wouldn't be necessary to do both, but experience tells me that it might be the quickest way to do it. So download and install the Android Studio, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Okay, here we are in Android Studio. I don't actually think there's anything that you need to do here. I mean, there are emulators over here. There are lots of the same functions. All this step is designed to do is to install the USB driver in order to be able to recognize our Android phone when we connect it via a USB port to our laptop. And once you've done it, you can quit out of it. And that's what I'm going to do. It seems crazy that you need to download a 1.2 gigabyte program in order to get probably what's a 1 megabyte driver, but I haven't found a workaround yet. And there we go. Okay, now having gone through all of those steps, we're going to see something quite interesting, which is that before we only had two different devices that were available for us to be able to run our application on. We had Chrome and Edge, but I've just plugged it in, and we've now got a third one, which is an SM. It's my my mobile phone there. And so we're going to select that, and you can see down here at the bottom, we've now got that phone available. Now, in order for that to work, you have got to set your Android phone to be in developer mode, and that you can just Google so easily. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but you need to go into your settings, and you need to tap build right in the deep belly of your settings 7 times, and some menus will magically appear. That is the principle of it. But I'm assuming that you can Google the phone must be in debug mode on the developer options, and a screen will pop up and it will say allow this and allow that. And once you do that, when you plug your phone into your laptop, you then have this option to be able to run the code here on the left hand side, the Android code that we've been talking about. It will get installed onto your phone, and you'll be able to use the hot load as many times as you like for as many hours you like when you push the code across from FlutterFlow. We're going to see how that works in a second. Okay, we're going to see this in action. In the inset over here, I'll just make it a bit brighter. We can see that we've got our phone running. I did that by simply plugging the phone in and running it the same way as I demonstrated with the web app. The only difference is that we've now got the option. If you look down on the bottom right hand side, you'll see there's an option to select the phone. Now that will be very small. That'll be difficult to see, but this is the best way I can demonstrate what's going on. So over here, I've got this page going on, and I'm just going to change sign in to sign in XX. So what do we do to make that change appear on the real actual phone? Is that we're going to go over here and we're going to push that to the repository, and we're going to push that button there a couple of times, and we're going to wait for that to complete. Okay, it's pushing, being indicated by this over here. We could go and do something else now, but since it's so quick, 45 seconds on average, we won't. Okay, it's complete here because there's no spinning wheel. So I'm going to head over to the inset laptop, and I know it's hard to see, and we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to open up the GitHub desktop. We're going to fetch the origin. Done. We're going to pull the origin. Done. We're just going to close that out. We're now going to go up here, if you can see, and we're going to hot reload. Then just touch the screen there because I want you to see. We're going to do that. It says sign in. Now it says sign in XX. Okay, let's go back to the main screen and put it back again. I'll take the double X out. We are going to push that to the repository. Off it goes. Okay, it's happening. Okay, it's done. Make the screen a bit brighter by tapping it. Back to GitHub desktop. Fetch the origin. Couple of seconds. Pull the origin, either here or here. It doesn't matter. Wait for that button to go blue. Shrink it down again. Now watch the screen over here where my finger is, okay? With the double X's, click on that, hot reload, it's gone. That's how quick you can update. And the beauty of it is, I'm going to disconnect this session, is that you can well, I won't, but you can actually just disconnect that phone and it will still carry on running on your phone. It won't break the code, so you can play around with it when you're in the office without it being connected. You can leave this connected and do those updates that quickly for 4 hours in a row. And if anything does go wrong, it will at times do. Come over to here and run again. And again, you're looking at the inset here, but run the app again in debug mode. Remember, we'll stop every time there's an error in the code, and without debugging, we'll continue as normal. And that is the beauty of the system. Did you see how quick it was to be able to make an update here and have it actually shown to you on your phone? Nearly coming to the end of this tutorial. I just need to quickly show the person who wanted to know how you would compile and take the FTP up the web files to the web server and where they are located. So we're just going to do that, and then we'll call that a wrap. So the answer to the question is where the web files are. They are under, in this directory, they're under build, scroll down, and web. That's where they are. There is a command that you could use. I've just checked out to check that it's correct. You can, if you don't want to have it displayed in Chrome automatically, the command would be flutter build web. I do not believe that you need to do both. It's one or other. But these are the files here. the telltale being the index HTML here. These are the files that you would need to FTP up to your web server in order for that to create what we saw earlier in the video when I did the run sequence on a Chrome or Edge, I can't remember, and we saw it appear as a normal website. These are the files that it was displaying. So I think we've covered everything, and thank you very much for listening.